Please remember, the views expressed on Albertans in Space by our guests and host alike are opinions and do not represent the entire industry as a whole. Our podcast serves only as a platform, and all topics discussed are primarily for educational purposes only. Welcome to Albertans in Space, the series where we talk to Albertans making waves in the local and global space industry. In today's episode, we have Bryan Versteeg with us to discuss the critical role of innovation and imagination in the future of space exploration and how the wonderful world of science fiction influences current engineering decisions. I'm your host, Zach Trolley.
And I'm your co-host and star child, Megan Westelmajor. Zach, what do aliens like to eat when they're on a diet?
Chocolate chip cookies, I'm guessing.
Unidentified frying objects.
All right. Albertans in Space is filmed in the city of Calgary on Treaty 7 territory. This land, traditionally called Mohkinstsis, belongs to many nations and people who make their home here. We honor the traditions taught to us by our elders and acknowledge the generosity of Mother Earth and to take care of our land as humanity expands to new worlds. Megan, do you have a favorite science fiction book or movie?
I do. Apart from Armageddon, top of my list. There's a really underrated movie that was made in 2009 called Moon with Sam Rockwell in it. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. It's so good. It's basically a one-man show about an astronaut that's been living on a lunar mine for 3 years, and some unexplainable things happened to him, but I won't say too much because spoiler alert.
Right.
The cool thing is it was the directorial debut of Duncan Jones, who was the son of David Bowie.
Some Space Odyssey going on
Space Odyssey. Anyway, what about you?
So the first sci-fi movie that really stuck with me was Aliens, the second one in the franchise, and it was because the people were so real in it. Ripley is a blue-collar worker. The soldiers don't want to be there. It's a crappy job for them. The officer was brand new and not really good at his job, to be honest. And just that casting of real life people amongst these fantastic sets and special effects and sound and music, it just transported me immediately there. I was lucky enough that Calgary Philharmonic a few years ago did a sci-fi soundtrack orchestra that I went and watched, and they did the sound bite where they're running away from the aliens. They're loading in the APC, and that music to this day gives me goosebumps. And I just every time I watch it, it's just amazing.
Like we've mentioned before on this series, art has played a significant role in how humans have interacted with space and space stories. Paintings like Van Gogh, Starry Night, and books like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, films like Apollo 13, 2001 Space Odyssey, and Interstellar, filmed in Alberta. These stories immerse us into an alternate reality and allow us to visually interpret and dream of what the future might hold for humankind. I'm a big fan of film. So, have you ever seen the movie La Voyage dans la Lune, or AKA The Trip to the Moon, by French filmmaker Georges Méliès?
Now, I've never seen it. I know what you're talking about, and I've actually used a lot of those still images in the presentations that I do when I talk about space.
For those who don't know, it's a 1902 French black and white silent film, probably one of the first science fiction films ever made. It's also considered to be one of the very first movies depicting space. It almost looks like a stage play. The film follows a group of astronomers that plan a journey to the moon by building a cannon and a bullet-shaped spacecraft that crash land, creating that famous image of the moon with a big cannon-shaped rocket in its eye, which I just find so comical and wonderful. You love books.
I do love books.
Yeah. Did you know the film was loosely based on From the Earth to the Moon by Jules Verne and H.G. Wells' The First Men on the Moon?
I didn't know that. Jules Verne, the guy who was writing Journey to the Center of the Earth and 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That's the one?
The guy.
I didn't. There we go. Learning something new every day.
Every day.
You know, those authors were considered the fathers of science fiction, and these stories and others were told with cinematic knowledge that didn't rely on the fantastical or magical or supernatural elements, and the rationale reasoning behind these technologies used to fly to the moon or go back in time, gave readers a more realistic approach to their work, so it was believable. And in short, it enabled them to reach a broader audience.
Time travel. What a concept. If you could go back or forward in time for 24 hours, where would you go?
I'd probably go to the future. I'm a big sci-fi guy, right? Maybe let's just throw today 3024. We'll go there.
It's 1,000 years.
Yeah. Give it take 1,000 years. Do the Futurama jump. And kind of see what happened to humans. Are we living in space? Are we thriving? Did we kill each other on, by accident, on purpose? Who knows? We have a lot of options.
The answers are probably all yes. Really. I think I'd just play it simple and go back and live with the dinosaurs.
Yeah. Just live that.
See if I can survive 24 hours with the dinosaurs.
With the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Another cool science fiction film made by Fritz Lang in 1929 is a German film called Woman in the Moon. And it was a big influence on Wernher von Braun, who helped design the V2 rocket that took our first picture of Earth. And even the Saturn V that took people to the moon was influenced based on that film.
God, that's why I love filmmaking and the power and art of storytelling. Do you know what science and art have in common? This is not a joke.
Okay.
It's an idea. Everything starts with curiosity. I think it's so incredible that space artists can visually interpret what it would look like to live and work in space using fact and science. Would gravity matter when planting a garden? Humans are super visual beings, so it's helpful to put into perspective space habitats through graphics and research with thought and fact behind it.
And I'm also sure those renderings help with getting grant funding.
Grant funding is important.
It is very important.
Help support our artists and our scientists.
Speaking of space artists, I am very excited to introduce today's guest, Bryan Versteeg. Bryan and I met probably over a decade ago at an art show that he was presenting at. He was displaying his work. I was a huge fan. I had seen his stuff in magazines, and I was so nervous to go up to introduce him to myself to him. But I'm so glad I did. His work is absolutely amazing, and we've become really good friends since then. But why don't you introduce him to our audience?
Bryan Versteeg is an award-winning conceptual designer from Calgary, Alberta. His biting passion to promote STEAM, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics, is the muse for his creative innovations in architectural and engineering designs. With over 20 years of experience, Bryan shifted his focus to space exploration, settlement, and industrialization and founded spacehabs.com, where his portfolio of work focuses on beautifully detailed visualizations of space habitats. Bryan's ingenious designs have also been featured in Deep Space Industries, National Geographic, New Scientist, Mars Exploration Magazine, Interorbital Systems, and Mars Foundation, and Mars One.
And we're lucky enough to have him do our episodic series art for Albertans in Space. So when you see those thumbnails, that was Bryan's art. Man, what a guy.
Can't wait to talk to him. Thank you for being with us today, Bryan. We're really excited to have you virtually in the studio. My first question for you is, did you always know you wanted to be an artist?
One of my earliest memories is sitting around the kitchen table. I was about 4 years old, and my dad and my older sister were there. My older sister had a project due for school. It was on giraffes, and my dad took a blank piece of paper. He was drawing the cover page for it, and he drew a giraffe on the piece of paper. There was a blank piece of paper, and then suddenly there was this giraffe. And anyone who hadn't seen a giraffe would look at this paper, and now they know what a giraffe looks like. The efficiency of that communication just struck me. Even at 4 years old, I thought, what kind of sorcery is this? This is marvelous. I was in awe of being able to take something from your head and communicate it clearly on a blank piece of paper. For a kid who didn't really like talking at all, this seemed like a way around all of that. This is like skipping the middleman. I actually don't need to use words.
So this is the embodiment of a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Absolutely. Take an idea in your head and put it on a piece of paper, portray an image. To me, has always seemed powerful. Just something about the personality that goes into the artwork that for some reason makes it just much more interesting to other people, because you're not just seeing a place or an idea, but you're seeing an individual expression of that place and idea.
Right.
Even now, cave drawings are fascinating to us because it's not even just the technique they used, but their expression of their time and place. And that transcends eons, for crying out loud.
How does an idea come to life? Tell us about your process from conceptualization to the actual doing of the process. Tell us about it.
I'm very much a designer / artist where I'm looking for a solution to a problem. And so I see something that needs to be resolved. Mm-hmm. And that drives me to start wondering about how we could resolve that. What are potential options? And at first, it's very amorphous. It's shapes, it's colors, it's proportions. I don't really know where I'm going yet. I have an idea where I'm going. I have no idea how I'm going to get there. Just looking at a piece of hardware that would be needed on an asteroid mining equipment, where you think, how are we actually going to grab onto this asteroid? The problems and the variables are, you can't just land on it and try to dig into it, because it has almost no gravity. So by pushing into it, you push yourself off of it. And so you almost have to hug it. And so how do you hug it? What do the contact points look like? As you get closer and closer to the problem, you start very far back. As you get closer and closer to the problem, you just start to solve details that you weren't even aware of before you really climbed into the situation. When I was younger, it was all pencils and pen drawings, and I started, watercolors and pastels to really try to get myself closer to the problem. But now, for the last 25 years, it's almost all been digital and 3D. So I'm able to get myself virtually into the space and literally walk around the space virtually.
So Bryan, you've done amazing work. You've designed space stations, O'Neill cylinders, landers, rovers, equipment. When did your passion for space start? I mean, you could have been drawing giraffes your whole career. What did you move from, 4-year-old and giraffes to designing entire space stations? What was that shift?
When I started drawing, I remember I was probably 9 years old on my dad's drafting table, and I spent a whole summer on this drafting table drawing up elevations and floor plans to houses. I loved where people live. That was always really interesting to me. And as I got older, I loved extremes of where people lived. And so it was tree houses, or it was undersea. It was just the extreme places people, even igloos, nothing that's really comfortable. And it just kept getting further and further. I suddenly became aware of space probably late 80s to early 90s, when I saw the space shuttle launching Hubble with the Canadarm, and the Canadarm's grabbing onto it and pulling it out, and blazing right across the arm is Canada. The Canada. And all of a sudden it became a lot more personal to me, that all these things done in space. Well, here's one thing that Canada's involved in. And that kind of gave me a connection to it. It made it more personal to me. It became more interesting. I wanted to know, what is it doing and why is it doing that? When we started getting more rovers on Mars and seeing what they're sending back, that became a real fascinating place to me. From a very young age, I did a lot of hiking. Getting up and over that hill and looking over the other side was fascinating to me. And when we started seeing images back from Mars, I wanted to see what was over that dune and the next dune. And I mean, every one of those hills are places that humans have never been. And how incredible would it be to actually walk up that hill and look over the other side, or pick up that rock, or roll it over. I mean, every kid loves just rolling over rocks and seeing what's underneath it. And here on Earth, you get worms and beetles and stuff like that. And so we wouldn't necessarily have that to look forward to on Mars. But I mean, it would just be fascinating to roll over the rocks and just see what's underneath it.
So of all the things that you've designed and worked on in these extreme environments, in these extreme habitats, what's the most, what's your favorite design, or your most challenging design that you've put together?
I was having a discussion with some buddies of mine about asteroid mining. I had read the book Mining the Sky by John S. Lewis. John S. Lewis is one of the global experts on resources from space, their accessibility, how to harvest them. And so this book was, to me, just revolutionary in that I knew asteroids were out there, and I knew there was metals on them. But it became apparent that these asteroids are actually very accessible, and they have almost unlimited resources. We could never use up all the resources available in the asteroids, and they're accessible. The things that can be constructed from your wildest dreams, the resources are already there. So asteroid mining to me wasn't necessarily something that was possible, but it seemed inevitable. And at that point, I'd been working in the architecture and engineering industry for over a decade, doing design visualizations for everything from overpasses, hospitals, condominiums. And so I had a skill set that allowed me to design and visualize and portray that visualization to other people. And I thought, this is something that I can do. I actually looked into Google Images, and I typed in asteroid mining. And the images it gave me were decades old. There was nothing that was really realistic. And I thought, here's a gap. that potentially I could fill. So why don't I create a bunch of images so next time someone types in asteroid mining, they can have an image. And so I created an image that shows there's an asteroid, there's a processing, and then off the processing, it has crates for the metals it's extracting. There's big globes of the water that it's storing. And so all in one picture, you kind of have this assessment of the situation. In this one image, you can kind of get the whole glimpse right there. And then the immediate follow-on to that image was this one that I created where from the asteroid, we are generating a large Stanford torus from it. So there's this really large space station coming off of this asteroid. In this one image, you can see the source, resources, the processing, and then the construction. So the why is included in this image. It ended up being used in lots of different magazines and by different companies. It was widely distributed because of its ability to kind of tell the whole story in one picture.
Humans are incredibly visual, and we were talking about that in the intro. Having something to see, to understand versus the conversation, oh, this is what we would do. It's harder to envision what that's going to look like until you see it. And your art is pretty fantastic. There's such minutia and such a detail, but you can see that there are structures in your images that we are familiar with. And then of course, this incredible alternate reality that we haven't got there yet, but it's such a great tool to help people understand and visualize themselves there. So can you tell us a little bit about what STEAM is? Where did it come from? And why is it important to have art in there?
With STEAM, we just add an A in there, and that's the art. When I interact with scientists and engineers, what I do with them, they know is extremely important. One thing that artists are able to do is take something that has never existed, never happened, and show people what it could look like. And that ends up inspiring the architects, engineers, scientists that are doing a lot of the work in the first place. They saw an image at some point that inspired them, or even helps in the communication of the process. So when I create images for any architect who's doing a large skyscraper, they're going to have all kinds of renderings done of what it could look like, and they use those to inform the design process. And they'll even have models built up. And that is the art part of the architecture. And being able to visualize what it is helps them to refine the solutions and potentially see things that they didn't necessarily see beforehand. The things that have never happened are difficult to explain if you've never seen it.
Right.
Asteroid mining, nobody's ever seen it. Anyone who has any inkling of what a habitat on Mars looks like is at one point in time or another inspired by an artist, because an artist created an image that showed you what it could look like. And whether that be the filmmakers on The Martian, or painters, or National Geographic, and when they would show images of the way things could look, that was always
the future, right? Here's the world of tomorrow.
I could never get enough of those images. And that's why I bought those magazines. And I had collections of going back to probably about 1990 for the next 8-9 years, every single month of just volumes of magazines, because I was always looking for those little pictures of what things were going to look like. And I got to a point in my life where I wasn't patient enough to wait for more images to come. And ultimately, you're very limited to what you get. You open up the magazine and it says there's an article on Mars, and you look and maybe there's only 2 pictures.
Right.
And you're like, well, they could have done better.
Or I want to see over that hill. I can see your picture,
exactly.
but I want to see the other side.
Exactly. Like so much more. I want 100 more of these. Like just keep on going. The things that I really want to see in my life that are unlikely to necessarily even happen during my lifetime. If I'm going to see them, there's a good chance that the only way I can see them is if I do them myself. And so that gives me kind of ownership of my own dreams. If you want to see something happen in your life, there's different ways that you can potentially make it happen.
Well, we asked each other this question in the intro, but is there a film that you have seen that really inspires you and thought, oh, that was really amazing what they did there with the background, with the setting, with the production design?
I love The Martian. I think it was so well done. It's my favorite book as well. what Andy Weir did there is he did a lot of research, and I like really hard science fiction. I like things that are believable, that are ground in real science and engineering. And although he took a few artistic liberties in the film, for the most part, it was really well done. It was beautiful to watch. In his research, he found gaps in the numbers, and the drama came from the gaps. Where he has Mark Watney there for so many days, you're going to need this amount of calories for those days,
Right.
and you can grow this amount with potatoes, but there's a gap there. And so the drama comes from the numbers. It's like he ran a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and then found some interesting gaps in the Excel spreadsheets and made a story over it. And I think
Spreadsheets save the
and I
day.
think
Again, I love spreadsheets.
Yeah. Every
It's
engineer
wonderful.
just popped up says spreadsheets.
It felt true to, science. It was based on, like, someone did a lot of research and put it into that story.
Yeah, it was really well done. I think another a TV show that really that I could watch over and over again is The Expanse.
Right.
I think they really tried to get the science right. They did a lot of consulting with people who know what they're talking about.
I haven't watched it yet. Have you watched Expanse?
Absolutely.
I need to watch
Four
it.
times. I watched it 4 times. So, Brian, let's talk about your influences. We can see behind you, the picture behind you has a bunch of greenery in it. How does you talk about going outdoors and hiking. How does your passion for nature and gardening, how does it influence your art, and how does that come through in your designs?
A lot of science fiction that we see represented on TV or in movies or in books, a lot of it can be quite sterile,
Yeah.
claustrophobic, or dystopian. And I believe that everywhere that people go, we bring beauty with us. Everywhere. So it doesn't matter if you have a 500 square foot apartment or a large home, small garden, big garden, even people living in caves try to beautify their caves. And everywhere we go, we are going to try to make it a nice place to live, because it's not just about survival, it's about living. Humans have evolved the entirety of our species in nature. We are reliant on nature. So wherever we go, we are going to bring nature, and we are going to try to immerse as much of it with us as possible. And so I've always loved indoor atriums, living in colder climates like Canada. We have the necessity to have gardens, and every city has some form of an indoor garden. In the middle of winter, you can be walking amongst lush plants and grasses and big leaves and trickling water, and it kind of inspires this like primal part in our brain that kind of makes us feel kind of human and ground to something and part of something. I try to create as much greenery as possible. The larger structures where you have a house, you have gardens, you have flowers, and the gardens are not just beautiful, they are life support. They are literally our life support. We bring our ecosystem with us, our biosphere with us, and it's the plants for our oxygen, scrubbing our carbon dioxide, water filtration, and our food. As a gardener myself, I love gardening. I've loved getting my hands dirty since I was really young, helping my mom in the garden, and I would want to bring gardening with me wherever I go, because I think it's therapeutic. It gets you moving, and I have a job that I spend a lot of time sitting down at the computer.
Right.
So it gets you moving. You getting out gardening is great work, especially if we are to have people who are remote from Earth, having that kind of connection, that kind of emotional support from plants, emotional support plants.
Right.
I have an emotional support garden. I'm going to bring an emotional support garden with me, no matter where I go.
Let's kind of imagine that for a while. So, we talked about that image. There's the asteroid. We're taking apart the asteroid. We're building a space station. We're now housing, thousands of people in this massive space station. You can't really just go out and plant a garden when your, house is made of steel and iron and copper. What's the technology that we use to bring this forward? How do I have my emotional support plant when my entire world is metal?
The first plants that we will have are going to be not as natural as we are used to. They're going to be tightly controlled hydroponics, aquaponics, and so they will be plants without without a soil or a medium to necessarily grow in. In order to really have a garden, you ultimately need soil, and soil is something that has to be built. So we would have to take what we can get and modify it. So on Mars, there are chlorides in the soil that would need to be removed in order to make it not a toxic soil, but there's processes to do that. And then you have to add organic matter into it. And so you might be using something like the offcuts or the scrap from a hydroponic process. Once you take your herbs and fruit or edible parts of the plants, the rest of it gets mulched and turned into organic matter for the soil.
And we get parks on Mars after that, but it's going to take a bit.
For sure. Yes. Yeah. Big parks on Mars. When I talk to people about living off of this planet and living in space stations, there's some people who are like, oh, I can't wait. That would be fantastic. And a lot of people are like, nope, not at all. And when you dig a little further and you have that discussion about like, well, specifically, what is it you wouldn't like? One thing is that they do envision very claustrophobic areas. And so you will be limited in volume, especially early on when we leave this planet to live somewhere else. But what I would see is some larger areas that are atriums, large gardens, parks, so that when you start to actually compare the different elements that we have here on Earth that really give you your quality of life, and how can we bring those with us? The average person who lives here in the city is going to spend a disproportionate amount of their time indoors anyways. So it might be their apartment or their house. So they wake up in their room, they go to the kitchen and they make a breakfast, perhaps get in a car and go to an office. Once they're in their office, there's not necessarily a lot of movement within that office. They don't necessarily need a lot of space to do all the things that they are doing, especially people with desk jobs. So if you had a small little area that is your living space, an area for your workspace, but you had access to a larger area that is a garden, then you would be able to, for the most part, fulfill most of the things in life that we consider quality of life. Then there's a lot of parallels between that person's life and our life here, that people who wouldn't necessarily want to go to space wouldn't necessarily believe that that's even possible.
I think that a lot of people see outer space as very dark, very cold, very unlife sustaining. So when you see your art showing this life, I'm sure people tell you, like, wow, I never thought that could be as lush or as full of life, because outside of the Earth, it seems like there's nothing that looks like what you've done.
There's an image that I created of it's just a small little house, garden around it, and it's within a larger structure. And the house is cute. The garden looks nice. The environment looks nice. And when I'd go to conferences or do shows, a lot of people who otherwise hadn't really thought about living in space look at this image and they say something like, "I'd live there." and as soon as they said that, all of a sudden you've just moved the whole conversation from all this why nots and reasons why they would never consider it in the first place. You kind of jumped past that to say, here's an example of what it could be. And then the conversation becomes, how do we get there? In all likelihood, I will never live in a space station. But if something that I do at some point has inspired someone who made it possible for someone else to live in a space station, then I would consider that a win for me. I would be thrilled to know that at some point, someone who worked, some engineer or scientist had been inspired by something I did.
Talking about gardening and being from Alberta, and I'm so in awe of people who can make their gardens look beautiful. And Zach told me he's a rose gardener.
Yeah.
My garden needs some serious support, but because sustainability is something that is on everyone's lips right now about how to better treat the earth before we go elsewhere, how does what you do help inspire people to make sustainability part of the conversation, not just to grow things outside of Earth, but also how to better the Earth?
I think space exploration and human space exploration is a great way to talk about sustainability and efficiency, because the margin of error for people living off the earth is very small. We can't make a lot of mistakes. We have to be extremely efficient in energy production and storage and distribution and water purification and agriculture and the usage and allocation of nutrients within the growing process, the efficiency of the LEDs, the pumps. Because the conditions are so difficult, we learn a lot more in a difficult location than we do in easier locations. So one thing that we've had here on Earth, there's a lot of places where you just throw some seeds on the ground, come back in 3 months, and there's a plant there that you can eat. And it's so easy. And then as that gets a little difficult, we just scatter a little bit of fertilizer, come back in 3 months, and there's something there. And because in a lot of cases it is relatively easy to grow things where they're meant to be grown anyways, we don't learn as much. Our access to the nutrients required is relatively easy. Then we can also be wasting in ways that otherwise we can't get away with in space. So we can use a lot more nutrients than we need in a certain area, which leads to other problems. It leads to those nutrients not being used, being washed down into streams and into waterways, creating algae blooms and polluting other areas. And the pollution process required to get those nutrients in the first place, if we are generating 60% more fertilizer than we need, then everything from the production of that fertilizer to the usage and what happens to the fertilizer when it's not used become potentially environmental problems. All those problems would have to be eliminated extremely early in the process off of the planet, because we couldn't afford to spend energy on things that we're not going to need, and we can't afford to use things that are dead-end products. So there has to be a cycle. So we have to be able to reuse, we have to be able to recycle. There's no valley that we can dump stuff in and call it a garbage pit in space, and we can't afford to dump stuff that we put energy in creating. And so I believe human space exploration, human settlement is really the tip of the spear of learning best practices, which have this trickle-down effect throughout humanity. So the better we can grow things using as little energy and as little input and as little nutrients as possible, if we can maximize the amount of calories we can get out of that, which is what we would have to do, that is a process that can be used wherever humans live, whether it be in isolated communities in the Arctic or Antarctic, or remote villages, or in densely populated centers. And so I think really the harder something is, the more potential we can learn from it. That makes all the other things easier. And in comparison, all the things we do on Earth would be easier. And so they'd all benefit. And when people talk about the money spent on space, none of the money spent on space is spent in space. It's all spent on Earth. So every single engineer who's worked on a space program has lived on our planet and continue to live on this planet. And so that money is technology that stays on our planet. Even if we're using it elsewhere, the technology developed stays on our planet and can be used by humanity and continues to be used by humanity.
So, Bryan, let's talk a little bit about scale, because we've been talking about space stations and stuff like that. And I think most people in their mind have, images of the ISS, astronauts floating on the corridor, room for, 6 to 10 people. But what you're talking about when you show in your art is O'Neill cylinders. Can you tell us what that is?
One thing that's enabled by the industrialization of the processes of building, resource gathering off of this planet is scale. So we've sent crafts to asteroids and they've gathered some samples and they've come back. When we send a craft to an asteroid with the intention of starting to refine that so that it's something we can use, that's really the beginning of the scale there. All the machinery that we send after that increases the capabilities. There's nothing that clearly defines the end of that scale. There's no predetermined limit to how much we could utilize. Once we are able to extract metal from an asteroid and process it, extrude it and use that to create other machines to extract and process and create. And they create other machines that extract, process, and create, that each one of those branches of the tree makes the tree a lot bigger. And so the total production scales. And so every year it's generating 50% more or double of what it was creating the year before.
Right.
So even if you take something like a penny and double it every day. In a month, you're at $1 million a day. That scale means that we're not just building these little cylinders that could house 6, 8 people, but large cylinders that could house millions. It's literally areas of landmass that would be equivalent to Canada in landmass, and that we could create, or doubling, the surface of the Earth over millennia in space. And so there's really no limit to how much we could create out there based on the resources that are available.
It's more space cities than space stations.
I hope this happens in our lifetime. I know it probably won't, but
It'd be amazing.
that would be amazing. Another topic that is hot in the art world right now is AI. What are your thoughts on this type of technology coming into your world?
A lot of mixed emotions with AI, because the capabilities and the potential are astronomical. If you look at it as a tool, it's going to be an extremely valuable tool that can be used to create things that we just otherwise could not have imagined.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a couple of different ways to look at it. Some people might talk about how it could eliminate artists because of what it could do. I love designing. And so I love the iterative process. I love coming up with a solution and then trying to refine it and then iterate it. And some of these solutions I might iterate 2-3 times in a day. Some, because they're larger solutions, might take 2-3 times in a week to iterate. Whereas an AI, given the same parameters, could iterate on that thousands of times in a minute. AI is going to be an extremely valuable tool that can do things that an artist themselves could never do.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to stop creating. If you're a chef and you love cooking, and you suddenly had a robot that could cook for you, would you stop cooking?
Right.
If you're a musician, love playing the guitar, and you had a robot that could play the guitar for you, you're still going to play the guitar. And so artists who love painting, I mean, there are machines right now that can move a paintbrush and can paint. Having something else do the fun for you isn't the point. As a tool, it's going to be able to allow us to do things in a scale that we could never have imagined. I am slow to integrate it into my pipeline just because I love all the different aspects of my pipeline. Ultimately, I think I will be using a lot more of AI integrated in the process to help me iterate quicker, to find and optimize solutions. But if you use it as a tool, maybe it's just like having a self-loading paintbrush, so you don't have to go back to the palette. It's just self-loading, and so you can do more paintings. And so maybe it's something that helps the artist as opposed to eliminates them.
So something that AI can't do is, well, at this point, is get outside and interact with other people. And you mentioned before showing these images and getting that feedback, that human feedback. And I know you go to trade shows, you go to the comic expos, and you do things at Calgary Nerd Night. Can you talk about kind of showing and sharing your art with the broader public and what that's like?
So when I get out to something like a comic expo or a conference or something like a nerd night, and for those who don't know Nerd Night, it's an event it's carried on in many different cities. Here in Calgary, we have Nerd Night that's been well run for at least a decade or so.
I think so, yeah.
I've been a speaker, I think 4 or 5 times. Each night they have 3 different speakers who each talk about something that they are a specialist in or particularly nerdy about. And so it's something that they've studied or worked on. Each night you're going to get 3 very diverse topics of someone talking about the things that inspire them, things that get them out of the bed in the morning. And so when I do my talks, I'm talking to a room full of people who potentially have any idea what it is I'm talking about or why, and they're going to see some things that they otherwise wouldn't have seen. I'm planting seeds, hopefully. Some of these people, and maybe they have children that they then go back and talk to about, or around a water cooler, now have a little more information on a specific aspect of a topic of human habitability of the solar system that they didn't have before, that could then inform a part of a discussion.
When's the next Nerd Night?
I'm not sure. They're off for the summer, so
I want to go to it.
Well,
I'd love to go.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. Great evening. Yeah, great evening out.
Bryan, so we have a thing that we like to do on this podcast, which is our book club. I'm just going to put on our book club hats here.
I've got double hat.
Double hat in it today.
I didn't really think about that.
And we want to know, what is your pick for our Albertan Space Book Club?
Okay, so I have a favorite, but I'm also just going to suggest some things that people should probably have on their shelves anyways.
Okay.
And so The High Frontier by Gerard O'Neill, that is in the mid-70s, an engineer named Gerard O'Neill wrote this book. We put a lot of study into it. How can we build these really large structures in space? And he did the engineering behind it and made a very good case for it being possible, something that could happen. It's a great book that's, if anyone who's interested in a lot of people living off the planet at some point, that's probably a book you should have on your in your wheelhouse.
And it's accompanied by all the art, right? There's these amazing 70s-esque paintings of his engineering, which really, I mean, I encourage everyone to look it up. Those paintings are amazing.
I would also suggest for someone who really wants to get into the numbers, it's a lot more of a scientific engineering read. Mining the Sky by John S. Lewis. The most entertaining book, The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury.
Yeah,
that's
OG
an all-timer.
sci-fi.
Yeah, and that's really very loose sci-fi. That's just like cowboys on Mars. But The Martian by Andy Weir is a great book on what can happen on Mars, and he does a lot of research. I think even if you've seen the movie, I think the book goes into a lot of detail that isn't covered in the movie. The book is very good.
I really do think that set the standard for sci-fi writing and storytelling with that strong engineering background. Like you said, a lot of the early sci-fi stuff had bits and pieces, but we were kind of filling in the gaps. Now we have a lot of those gaps filled one way or another, and we can tell stories that are, as far as we know, physically, scientifically, and engineeringly accurate, which I think really, the engineer in my brain loves that, because we're solving real problems.
Also, hey, throw in A Case for Mars. By Robert Zubrin.
Yeah.
He makes a really good case for Mars, and explains possibilities of it, and what the mission could look like, and how attainable that vision is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a fair bit. It's hard to pick just one. I mean,
lots of great stuff.
I've got lots of books, so lots of books.
So I guess my last question is, what's next for Bryan Versteeg?
As an artist designer, I've always been trying to increase the fidelity of my images and make them more realistic, more believable, and increase the possibility of immersion into these spaces. And for a long time, if it was just, if it was a pencil drawing, I'd have one image and I could spend hours on it, and then the next one image and just hours on it. And a pencil drawing can only get you so much into the space. You're limited by your medium. And as I added skills or techniques or technologies to my process, I've been able to bring the person further into the space. And so now I'm using 3D gaming engines to allow a person to be able to walk in these spaces, in these scenes, and interact with the elements. With the VR technology that's available, I want to make an immersive space that someone can really experience all the different elements of human habitats off of this planet.
I feel like VR has the ability to really benefit putting people into that space and really interacting with it and seeing what it would look like. I played the Last of Us game, and you can literally look 360 degrees and you can see reflections, and the amount of work that goes into that, I'm in awe of. That's a different kind of artwork that I'm just super not familiar with, but so brilliant. It looks so good. So I can't wait to see what you come up with. Send it our way. Send the beta our way. We'll
do our hand at surviving on Mars and see how far we get. A day or two, probably.
Probably not. Maybe a minute. Yeah.
1 foot down and trip and fall, and that was it.
Exactly.
Do over. Bryan, thank you very much for joining us on Albertans in Space. We look forward to seeing your new images, your new thoughts, your new processes, and seeing how far we survive in these harsh environments. Maybe start us off with a garden. We'll skip the hard part and we'll go right to the walking through the space station gardens.
I need some help with my garden here on Earth. So, are you free tomorrow? Just kidding. Just kidding.
We want to thank Bryan Versteeg for speaking with us today. There is something beautiful, when the concrete world of science joins forces with the metaphysical world of the human imagination.
Totally true. If you'd like to learn more and follow Bryan on his work, go to spacehabs.com. And if you want to check out Nerd Night, Google it.
Big shout out to Sandra Lynn for her writing and research efforts, James, our sound engineer, 6 Degrees Music and Sound, Dan, our DOP camera, and Kristen, our behind-the-scenes content creator, for helping us make this podcast look and sound amazing.
Next time on Albertans in Space, we will be discussing the different types of space resources and the part that Alberta plays in it with the co-founder and CEO of Foundation Space Resources, Sean Mitra.
Thank you so much for watching Albertans in Space. We hope you enjoyed the show today. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a like. We appreciate your support. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at AlbertansInSpace_podcast.
See you next time.
See ya.